Welcome to another episode of We Should Talk More podcast. In this episode, my guest shares her experience dealing with a highly undiagnosed pregnancy condition known as hyperemesis.
I'm recording now.
Okay.
So yeah, we're like officially on.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Ileana,
Of
for
course.
joining me today.
Yeah. It's a
This
pleasure.
this is extra special, I think, and a treat because again, we went to high school
Right.
over a decade ago, so this is like an opportunity to just like reconnect for us as people,
Yeah.
and also to talk about something very significant to you. You and I connected for one because you were so kind to reply to like a previous episode I posted.
Yeah.
I was super thrilled about that. Any kind of response to it has been very special to me. And you mentioned to me when we spoke on the phone that while you were pregnant with all three of your children, you suffered from a highly undiagnosed condition known as I hope I pronounced it correctly, Hyperemesis Gravidarum.
Well, I don't know how to say that second word.
Okay,
But,
okay.
but they refer to as HG, just to kind of shorten it. But yeah, it's hyperemesis, and it's basically severe morning sickness. And a lot of women experience this sort of condition maybe for the first 4 months of their pregnancies.
Before we go any further, could you please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are?
My name is Ileana Lopez, currently living in Florida. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and I have 3 kids. I have a 9-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1.5-year-old.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ileana. So yeah, if you could please talk to me about this condition that you experienced throughout your pregnancy. If you'd like to start from the very first one, and then we can just go from there.
Okay, yeah. So when I found out that I was pregnant from my first daughter, I think after 8 weeks, I started getting very sick. At the time, I was working, and I just couldn't manage to get up and go to work in the morning. I mean, it was like really bad. I felt almost like if I was dying. I couldn't eat anything. I would throw everything up, and it was just severe sickness.
Now, did the sickness start? I read some things online about how some women start to have symptoms of this before they even know they're pregnant.
Yes.
When did it start for you?
So for each of them, it started at different times. So which is very interesting, because for the first one, it started around 8 to 10 weeks, which is when you normally start feeling symptoms in a pregnancy. And then for the others, I started as early as 6 weeks. I mean, I found out I was pregnant, and literally like a week or 2 later, I found out very early that I was pregnant, for each of them. So we're talking like 4 to 5 weeks. I mean, I found out very early, and a week or 2 after is when I started to feel very, very sick. In the beginning, it's intense, but I feel as the months pass, it starts getting worse and worse. And typically for most women, after 4 months, they start to feel a little bit better. So symptoms sort of subside. Then for me, that didn't happen. It lasted all the way through the 9 months. So I think that's what killed me the most. I mean, I was so sick for 9 months throughout each of these pregnancies. And,
Sure. And you mentioned to me on the phone that the first time around, you weren't even diagnosed with it. You didn't even know what it was. You just thought it was morning sickness, right? Can you
Right.
talk to me about that?
I'm starting to get the symptoms, and I don't immediately get feel severely sick. I just start throwing up, but I'm still functional. And as time progresses, I become very dehydrated, lethargic, and it's just I'm just sick. Like I should be in bed. So I just thought that I was sick. I just didn't know that maybe I was weak, that I didn't know how to handle it. And, everyone gets pregnant, everyone gets sick. And I just, maybe I wasn't as strong as these other women. And, I mean, it's like having like a stomach virus that just doesn't go away, right? So, when I made my doctor aware of how I was feeling, she had mentioned that she experienced very similar symptoms. So she prescribed me medication. I barely took the medications, but when I did take them, it did not work. So that's why I wasn't consistent with it. It was just very difficult for me to do anything, really. There were moments where you do feel good and you're able to get up and do certain things, but you have to do them, and then maybe a few minutes later you feel weak, so you need to sit back down because you're not consuming enough liquids, you're not consuming enough food.
So how are people around you responding to this? So you're feeling extremely sick. Are people taking you seriously? Are they helping you? How are they responding to what you're going through?
I think I received a little bit of both. My mom was very supportive as she did experience similar symptoms being pregnant with me. She was supportive, but she was also very tough on me. So she would tell me, you need to get up, you need to force yourself to eat, and so forth. And I just couldn't do it. It was so intense that I just couldn't do it. And I would send her emails from work like, I can't do this anymore. And she's like, well, you have to pull through because, you're pregnant. So there's nothing you can do.
How far in are you at this point?
At this point, I'm literally maybe like 5 months.
Okay.
Yeah. 5 months. It was very difficult, especially being pregnant for the first time. It's supposed to be, like your most glorious time, where you feel good, you're creating life, and it just wasn't for me. It was very miserable.
Mm-hmm.
It was a miserable experience.
Okay. So talk to me, as you're getting to the end of that first pregnancy, are your symptoms worsening? Did you ever have to like check into the hospital? How are you handling all of it?
With the first pregnancy, I did not go to the hospital, although I think I should have. Um, I would force myself to drink liquids while I was in bed. And on my commute to work, I would always try to have some sort of liquid in hand, and crackers. And that didn't always help. I mean, there were many occasions where I would literally almost like pass out. And you know how New York is. I mean, it's crowded. There are no seats. No one knew I was pregnant. I wasn't showing. Even at 5 months, I was not showing. That's how much weight I have lost. You feel like you're going to faint. And then it's like a miracle when you see a seat and you're able to sit down and you don't reach that point where you do pass out, right? Because now you can breathe and you're more at ease, and you end up not passing out, but you still feel very weak. So I experienced a lot of those during my morning commutes going to work. I thought I literally would have to just quit and just stay home, but I couldn't do it because I needed the money.
Of course, like most people.
Yeah. I couldn't do it. Thankfully I didn't get fired over this because I did notify them that I was pregnant and I was just going through a hard time. But I know that it affected people around me, especially at work. I mean, I don't blame anyone for feeling the way that they feel, just because when you don't know much about certain conditions. And remember, at the time, I hadn't been diagnosed, so I didn't even know what I had. I thought this was normal and that I just wasn't capable of handling it.
Mm-hmm.
So, because no one in my department had kids. So when you don't know what someone else is going through, you kind of get to be a little bit judgy about it.
So you went continued. You worked at an office. What was like the
Yes.
situation?
So I was a customer service representative at Kleinfeld at the time. So we had to
Okay.
be present. I mean, the volume of work and calls was really high.
So you
So
continued to go in like all the way up until you had to leave
d-
for actual maternity?
yeah. Mhm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it was really bad. I mean, like I was calling out 2 to 3 times a week. So I was not in the office um for much. So that's why I say that I know I affected the people around me, because now their workload became much higher with me being absent.
Mhm.
So I do understand the frustrations there. But you know, this was something that was real, and I just had to deal with.
How did you feel just emotionally about, you're dealing with all these severe physical symptoms, and it seems like a lot of people you are around are just not taking you seriously and are basically being like, hey, toughen up. This is being pregnant and you're being dramatic.
Hmm.
How did you deal with that day to day? I imagine that must have been very challenging.
You feel very alone. You feel like no one gets you. No one understands, and you feel alone. Like you really feel like it's your fault because you're unable to handle this the same way that someone else is. So it's just very lonely, and it is very emotional, and it's you hit almost like a depressed state.
Yeah, I can imagine. How was it with medical professionals? I know you said that your doctor at the time was like, I had similar things when I was pregnant, but she still wasn't diagnosing you.
Right.
What about any, in general, the medical community, people you encountered? Was it any different there?
No, I feel like there was absolutely no support.
Okay.
Absolutely no support.
That sounds
Yeah.
terrifying. I
Yeah, it
can't even
is.
imagine. And
Yeah.
not knowing what you're suffering from and having people dismiss you for it.
Yeah.
Just the experience of pregnancy itself can be very isolating for women, even when they're having a normal pregnancy. So for you to be
Right.
going through that, plus all this other stuff,
Yeah.
um, you
It's
are a
quite
strong
difficult.
woman.
Oh,
So,
thank you.
okay, so let's move into your second pregnancy now. So first of all, after going through that with your first pregnancy, I'm amazed that you were open to continuing on. So talk to me about once you went through your first pregnancy, were you still like, I want to have more kids? How did you think about all of that, the process you went through and moving into, the next thing?
So at first, when I delivered Alea, which she's my oldest, she's 9 now. I didn't want any more kids. I didn't want to go through that again. But then my mom, she had mentioned to me one day, every pregnancy is different. You can't think negatively about it. I still didn't want any more kids, but I entered a new relationship, and although he really, I don't think he wanted kids really. I think we were just riding the wave. I mean, we were living together at the time, and it just sort of happened. He knew my experience being pregnant with Alea, but I honestly thought that it was going to be different this time, just because of what my mom said. And then come to find out that very early in the pregnancy, I started feeling symptoms, and severe symptoms at that. I mean, you go from one day being normal to like the next day just being absolutely sick. So it was really hard. It was really, really hard. And it affected everyone around me again. My daughter, she was so little. I mean, she was 5, but she's still small, and she didn't really understand what was going on. So I had to talk to her a lot. And my parents were supportive in that they would take and babysit Alea for me whenever I needed. But I mean, I still had to take her to school. I still had to get her ready in the morning. And I was doing this like throwing up every second. So it was very tough. It was very difficult.
Was your partner at least taking you seriously?
He was very supportive in the beginning. Well, he was supportive throughout, but of course you get a few moments. You know, he's a man, so he has to work, and then he had to come home and, you know, take care of me and do everything for the house. So yeah, there were moments where he would get frustrated, but he never took anything out on me, although I could see it in his face that he wasn't too happy about what was going on. But in the very beginning, he was actually very concerned. And when he saw my diagnosis, he started crying because he didn't, you know, like he thought it was going to affect me and the baby in a much more severe way than what it was, because you could survive this, right? But you know, he's thinking the worst. And I mean, I went to the hospital twice, and he was there by my side and just making sure that I was getting the treatment that I deserved in the hospital. So, you know, to answer your question, yes, he was always very supportive, even through the very tough times.
Okay. So now you're going through your second pregnancy. You're obviously recognizing the severity of the
Yeah.
symptoms from the previous time. At this point, I think you moved to Florida, right? Or are you still in New York?
I'm still in New York at this point.
Okay. And
Yeah.
are you being seen by the same doctor?
No, so I have a different doctor now. He understands the severity of it. There was a little bit more support there, as he would, you know, he was trying different medications. He was telling me what to do, but unfortunately nothing was working. So I was still just writing it out.
Did he diagnose you?
I was diagnosed in the hospital. And then, yeah, and then I took those hospital papers to him so that he can know what was going on. And then that's when he prescribed me medication.
Wow. So at which
Yeah.
point so when did you end up going to the hospital during the second pregnancy?
Very early. So I think I must have been maybe, I think 8 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very,
Okay.
very early.
And did they check you out and released you, or they kept you there? What happened?
So they put me on IV because I was dehydrated. After examining me, they saw that everything was normal. I believe they even took out blood and everything came back normal. I'm not really sure what they were checking for because I really don't remember. But they gave me medication and I did feel much better. So they released me, and then they just told me to go to my doctor and see what, you know, what medication that they can give me. They suggested also a vitamin B12, no, B6. Supposedly this helps with nausea, and it's very healthy for the baby to receive very early in the pregnancy for development purposes. So I was taking that every day, but it still did not help. My symptoms, my symptoms were just severe. So nothing really helped.
I was listening to, in preparation to this, I listened to an interview on the subject with another woman who experienced a similar kind of thing. And
Mhm.
one thing she said that really shocked me was that just doing regular, like daily maintenance of herself
Mhm.
would make her sick.
Yeah.
Things like how she couldn't brush her hair for
Yeah.
like 2 months because brushing her hair triggered nausea.
That's
Did you have anything like that?
yes. For the first pregnancy, I couldn't look at myself in the mirror. Like my entire body. I would look at myself and I would just run to the bathroom. I just couldn't stand the sight of myself. It was the weirdest thing. So because of that, I never connected with my pregnancy. I never connected with the baby.
So was it like you'd look in a mirror and you didn't recognize yourself, or what was it exactly that made you uncomfortable? Or is it just like literally the act of seeing your reflection?
I think it was just knowing that I was pregnant and my pregnant was causing what I had. And I just didn't want to be pregnant.
Right. And looking in the mirror was
And
like a
looking in the mirror
reality
was,
check.
yeah, it was just like, wow, this is happening and I just don't want this. Hmm. And it would make me
Okay.
sick. For this second one, I can't I don't remember. I would look at myself in the mirror a lot, but I liked what I saw. It didn't make me sick. I think it was more like smells. I couldn't be in my kitchen for too long. I hated the smell in my kitchen. It would send me to the bathroom. But I don't think I experienced that part for my second one.
So you also mentioned to me on the phone some ways in which having this condition during your pregnancy also affected your deliveries of your children.
Yes.
Could you talk to me about that?
So for the first pregnancy, being that I had hyperemesis and my anxiety was just off the rails, I knew that I was going to ask for an epidural just to kind of keep me calm so that I can deliver as natural as possible, I guess, and as safe as possible. During my pregnancy, I also was not exercising or walking much because of my condition. When I asked for epidural and I was able to deliver the baby, I basically got muscle spasms all through my back and my arms. So I couldn't move. So that was like another thing. It's like, you go through so much during your pregnancy, you're able to deliver fine. And then once the baby's here, you start feeling all the effects. So because I wasn't exercising and moving my body the way that I should have, when you give birth, you use all these muscles that you haven't used before. Mm-hmm. So literally I just could not move. And then on top of that, I had a sinus infection, which I didn't even know that it was a sinus infection because that's something that I never experienced at that time. So I had a really hard time even carrying the baby, even taking care of the baby after giving birth. So my mom had to step in and do most of that work for me. So I wasn't able to breastfeed either.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So it sounds kind of almost like if you don't go to the gym for years and then you go super hard and then you're all sore.
That's exactly
like that
what it
kind
is.
Of, okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And so once you delivered, symptoms go away immediately after the baby came out the first time?
Yes. So after delivery, you don't feel any of those severe symptoms anymore. It's literally like night and day. I think they say what causes it is just a heighten in hormones when you're pregnant. Now, being that the baby is out, you don't feel that anymore.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
I can't even imagine. It's unreal.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's go to second pregnancy. Again, you're going through all of this. You're getting closer to delivery time. Talk to me about your experience delivering your second child after having gone through, all that same stuff, or even it was more severe, right? Second time around for you?
So the second time around, the pains were more severe, but I didn't receive the epidural in time. I think through the motions of labor, you don't really think about your hyperemesis. Like your hyperemesis is just kind of out the window and you're focusing on delivering the baby and you're focusing on the pain. And what's interesting to me is that I never felt nauseous, although I did throw up because of the intense pain that I was feeling, but it wasn't because I had stomach aches or anything like that, as I would, if I wasn't delivering. So they never checked me to see how much I was dilated, and they gave me the epidural as I had requested, but I think because I was induced, it just happened much quicker and the pains were more intense. So once I received the epidural, I think 5 minutes later, I can feel the baby like ready to come out. And I'm like, I have to push. He's coming.
Before the epidural even kicked in.
Right. Yeah. And then after the fact, I was like, my body was numb. I was so numb. Yeah.
How long before your feeling came back into so you delivered your child and you're still laying there numb?
Yeah. I was numb. I didn't feel anything. Sometimes, like you feel the pains after birth, and I didn't feel anything. But the thing with him is that once I gave birth to him and once I was home, I felt so strong. I felt like, oh my God, I'm not sick anymore. I feel so good. I have my 2 kids. And I think I went into parenthood a lot easier. You know, like I took care of the baby, I had him on a schedule, and I was able to get my daughter ready for school and send her off. So I felt really strong. I think we were home for like a week and then my daughter started school. So I was already walking her to school. So that's something that I'll never forget, was just the strength that I had after the fact.
And so again, the hyperemesis symptoms went away as soon as you delivered the
Yes.
baby.
Yes. Just
Wow.
night and day,
Okay.
just went away.
So it's like a rush of energy back into your
Yeah,
body.
like
You're like,
you
oh, I'm
almost,
alive again.
yeah, you almost feel
Yeah.
like yourself, although you're not fully yourself, right? Because you have all these hormones, still all over the place. And I was also breastfeeding full time. You don't feel any of those symptoms anymore.
That's incredible. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Okay. So now you had a third baby. Super mom, much. Now you've gone through 2 pregnancies, both
Hmm.
hyperemesis. I keep wanting to say hyper-nemesis because that's what it really is. So now you've gone through 2 pregnancies. At this point, I'm sure you're kind of like, this is how my pregnancies are.
Yeah. I knew, I mean, this third one, like the other ones were a surprise, but this one was a great surprise because it was only, I think my baby was 1.5 at that time, and then I find out that I'm pregnant, and going through it back to back was much harder than waiting that 5-year gap.
Mm-hmm.
Your body hasn't fully recovered yet. I think it takes up to like 3 years or so after you have a baby for your body to fully recover. Anxiety again heightened, and I knew what was coming. So I quickly made an appointment. I made them aware, and they knew what the condition was. They understood, so they try to get me in a little bit earlier, just so that I can start receiving medication a little bit earlier. Although they don't recommend you receiving medication so early on because it can affect the development of the baby. But I think at that point I was just like, I have 2 kids, I have a baby, and I think she was 7 years old at the time to take care of, and I have no choice.
Yeah.
This time around, I felt a lot more supportive. I think it was because the facility I went to, they were more like holistic based, and you're dealing with with a doctor, but you're also dealing with a midwife. And I think they give you all these strategies and remedies as to what can help. Although nothing helped, the support was there. I even had a nurse that would call me, I think every month, to kind of see my progress.
Mm-hmm. So you are, I understand you, at this point you're living in Florida.
Yes, at this point,
and
I'm in
and
Florida.
you are going, you mentioned holistic approaches. Now you were still in the hospital, but just the care they were providing to you felt more holistic than
Yes,
that of the previous experience.
yes,
That's so interesting to me.
yes. And I never knew that that was an option, being in a hospital. Like, you think that you have to get that sort of care, like if you're delivering at home or maybe like in a
Mm-hmm.
facility where it's a little more intimate. But no, I was in one of the major hospitals here in Orlando, and I still received that support. And it's good to get both sides of things, because and then you're able to choose what works best for you. Every pregnancy is different, regardless if you have hyperemesis or you don't. The spectrum of hyperemesis, I think, is pretty wide, because as I mentioned before, some women go through it maybe for the first 4 months of it and symptoms subside, where mine's never did. So I think it's just the support that they gave. And this time around was also a lot more intense than it was for the other ones. So it got
Okay.
worse and worse each time. For this one, I had to have a pump injected in my stomach to provide 24-hour medication care. And the only time I would take it off was to take a shower. And then I would have to insert it back.
How big is this? Can you kind of like
Yes, so
demonstrate?
the pump is about this big, and it's connected to like a tube that you insert through a needle onto your belly. Yeah, so you could do your thigh or your belly. I always found that anything on my thigh would hurt, so I would use my belly. And you can't poke it on the same hole twice, so you have to find different spots. So that was a challenge, and it hurt. You know, like imagine just poking a needle onto your skin. So it was just too much.
And then you have to keep it in there.
And then I have
for
to
the whole
keep it
day
there. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
while taking care of a toddler
Yes.
and an older child.
And an older child, and cooking and cleaning. I mean, because we had to eat, you know, so there was times, because when you're sick and you have hyperemesis, sometimes the smells are intense. So anything can trigger nausea. So I would put like a mask over myself and cook because I could not stand the smell of food. So I would have to put a mask. I mean, it didn't work all the way, but it helped. And then you know, cooking and everything, and it was tough.
And you're cooking food that you can't even eat.
That I can't eat.
Yourself.
Right. I can't eat.
You know, that's the really interesting and amazing thing that you see in womanhood is how much self-sacrifice
Oh my God. Yes.
women do that is not even recognized or
I 100% agree with that.
seen by people at
Yeah.
all. You're cooking a meal in a mask with a needle in your stomach and food you're not even gonna eat.
Yeah.
Are you still like firmly holding on to the paper from the second pregnancy where they said this is what you have, the condition, so there's no more questions? So anytime you see a doctor, you're just like, this, I've been told that this is what I'm diagnosed with.
So you would think I would do that, but I think I still have my hospital papers, but I never brought it to the doctor that I was seeing at the time, or the midwife that I was seeing. They knew from the very beginning.
So they weren't doubting you. They weren't.
No, they were not questioning it, especially being that I had gone through it 2 times prior to that. So they really provided the support at that point. So that's, you know, I knew that they knew what they were doing, just because of the care and how sympathetic they were towards me and my condition.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm so glad to hear that at least you're getting a little bit more of like the recognition and support, and people are actually starting to pay attention finally.
Yeah.
That must have been night and day. And I'm also curious, the people who doubted you in the beginning pregnancies, and now that you're like, hey, this is a legitimate condition that I have, where are you getting people sort of saying like, hey, I'm sorry that I doubted you, anything like that?
So I did have one person that reached out to me, just letting me know, you know, now she has kids of her own, and she did reach out, and she had said something along the lines like, wow, like I had a normal pregnancy and I still had a hard time, and I can't imagine what you have, you know, gone through, being that you were diagnosed with this, and even after having the baby, how hard it is just to be a mom and hold a job. And to hold everything else, it's just very difficult. And people, sometimes when you don't have kids, you don't realize all the hard work that goes behind being a mom and how it affects everything else, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily always have to affect it in a negative way, but it is a challenge, and people don't talk about that. And now that she had kids, she sort of recognized everything, you know, just my condition, and how hard it must have been to have to go through that, and now be a full-time mom and have a full-time job and so forth. So it was really nice.
Yeah.
To just get that kind of response. Yeah.
Yeah, like finally.
I know.
I've only waited all this time.
I know.
So in your third pregnancy, your first child, your daughter, she is now how old?
She's now she's now 8.
Okay.
Yeah.
When she was seeing you going through all of these severe pains and, all the things you were dealing with, how was she processing it? How was she responding? How was she handling it? Because she's a pretty big girl now. So she
Right.
saw that mama is sick.
Yeah.
Talk to me about how she handled that.
So she's a strong girl. I think for the second pregnancy, she didn't understand what was going on, and it kind of, I feel like I traumatized her because I would throw up. Sometimes I couldn't make it to the bathroom, so I would throw up in odd places, and she's like, "Oh my God, mom, oh my God." I think being pregnant the third time, and she seeing me for the second time being sick, I think she already knew what was happening.
Mhm.
But I was spending no time with her, and I think that really affected her. She stood in her room a lot, playing and just doing all these different things. But I think it affected her just because she wasn't spending that one-on-one time with me, and she felt alone.
Yeah. So, and thinking about that, I'm sure that was another whole other side of going through this because not only are you dealing with it on your own
Right.
through physical and emotional, eh, situations that you are encountering, but you have your other kids who
Mm-hmm.
you have to tend to.
Right.
I can't even imagine how challenging. And then the whole thing with like mom guilt, mom
Oh
guilt is
yeah,
a real thing all the
I
time.
definitely felt that. I mean, when you have, because my son, right after I found out that I was pregnant, he turned 2, maybe 2 months later. He literally would have to fend for himself, and it's so sad to say, but I mean, it helped him grow up a little faster. But
Mhm.
he literally, I'm at 2 years old, he's sitting right next to me on the bed watching his iPad, right? Because that was the only thing that would keep him still. So
Mhm.
he's watching an iPad. Of course, you don't want your kids on it for too long. But whenever he was hungry, he would go downstairs, go to the pantry and grab a snack, and then he'll come right up and eat. And a lot of the times, I mean, he was eating, not that yogurt is a bad lunch, but he would go to the refrigerator,
Mhm.
get a yogurt, and will bring it up to me. And like, mommy, I'm hungry, you know? And I'm like, oh my
That's
God.
interesting.
Yeah. And then my daughter was in school during this time. So she wasn't able to help him. But when she would get home, if I needed help with anything, she was there. But of course, she would, catch her tantrums and so forth because she wasn't getting the attention that she needed from me as a mom. So it took a toll on me, and it took a toll on them. It's just
Mhm.
really sad.
Yeah,
Just really
yeah, no,
sad.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
There's a
Hmm.
million things that women feel guilty about in
Oh,
motherhood as it is. And,
right.
I'm sure, that's just another thing that's adding to the challenge of your situation. So now you are getting to the completion of your third pregnancy. Talk to me
Yes.
about the delivery of your third child and how did if the hyperemesis symptoms interact with that, how did it
Yeah.
affect the
This
delivery, if
one,
anything at
this
all?
this one is a bit interesting because I was on medication 24 hours a day. It created yeast in my body to kind of come out. So I guess it was a reaction to it. They didn't tell me that it was a reaction to it, but I don't have issues like this. I don't have skin issues or anything of that nature. So I would get like these bumps that were coming out in on different spots of my body. So like my back, my stomach, and my leg areas. And when I went to so my water had broken. When I went to the delivery room, I knew that I had possibly wanted epidural again. But this time I requested it a bit sooner than I had done before, just in case they would take too long. So when the specialist got to me, she saw that I had yeast on the exact same spot where I was supposed to, well, where the needle was supposed to enter through, right? So
Mm-hmm.
because of that, she did not feel comfortable doing that. I mean, having epidural, it's pretty risky, right? Because they're injecting it in your spine, so it's very risky. And she was just not for it. She's like, I'm so sorry, but there's no way that I can do this. And I was like, ah.
I can't even imagine. After having gone
So
through all that,
yeah,
you're there like, what do you mean no?
I
But they're like, how much more can you take?
yeah, I know. So I'm like, you know what? I just have to. I'm the type of person that when I encounter issues, okay, this is an issue. Okay, so we're going to move forward. And I'm just thinking solution, solution, solution. The only thing to do there was just to mentally prepare for what I was going to endure now. So, natural birth, non medicated, and that's what I had to prepare for. So, I had to be strong and I had to do my breathing exercises and just try my best. But as I mentioned before, I had the support. The nurses and the midwife that was there, she literally told me, listen, I cannot endure pain and I did this naturally. You got this. You can do it. And she put me in different positions and different, for me to do different motions. I mean, they put me in a hot shower and laying on a ball. I didn't even know that these were options that you can ask for in a hospital. Like, I had no idea. And they did everything to just try and keep me as comfortable as possible and to relieve as much pain as possible. So I was really grateful for that. And then my partner, Miguel, he supported me throughout the entire way. I mean, he was rooting me on and like, you got this, you can do this. I mean, it got to a point that I started like shedding tears and he was like, nope, don't cry. You got this, you got this.
Were you shedding tears out of physical pain or just emotionally like, I can't
It
do this anymore?
it was both. It was definitely both. The pain was excruciating and like emotionally, I was literally, how much more can I take? How much more can I go through? Like, this is just torture. But when you cry, your breathing is not in sync. So he wanted me to just continue with my breathing exercises so that I can just go through the motions of it. And thankfully he did that, because I think if I would have cried, it would have created more issues. And but him and the nurses and the midwife there, they made it comfortable for me to just do whatever I needed to do and be as comfortable as possible so that I can deliver this baby.
Yeah. Yeah, and so the same, huh? Like the baby arrives
The
and all
baby
the symptoms just
out the
gone.
window. Yep. Out the
Wow.
window. Yeah. This time I think I was way more tired. I think at this point, even after delivering the baby, I was exhausted. I was happy that I had the baby. I connected with the baby. But I was exhausted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
When the baby came out, where you're like, that's it, I'm
Oh,
done. No more kids.
yes. And I'm like, thank God he's here. I'm good. He's good. Thank God. But I am done. We're not doing this anymore.
So one thing I also wanted to talk to you about is you had mentioned to me before that you were prescribed some pretty severe medication
Yeah.
to treat the symptoms
Yeah.
in your third pregnancy.
Hmm. So the medication is called Zofran. I finally remember the name, right? So um, it's a medication that they give cancer patients when they're going through chemo to prevent them from throwing up and getting sick. So this is the medication that was prescribed to me, and this was the only thing that helped me, but it didn't help me all the way, of course, because I was still feeling the symptoms. But it was the only thing that can get me out of bed and be able to complete any daily tasks.
So just to put in perspective for people listening, your nausea was so severe that
Hmm.
you had to have cancer medication prescribed to combat the symptoms. That's
Yeah.
crazy. That's wild. That really puts it in
Yeah.
perspective. So another thing that I read about how some women have once they go through hyperemesis
Hmm.
and even once they deliver their child, they move on, the symptoms are gone. Sometimes they'll still get trauma responses that are sort of built
Oh my
into
God.
the
Yeah.
system.
Hmm.
Like I heard one where the woman was saying how after she had her kid, even 3 weeks later, her baby like puked while feeding, and she immediately got
Mm.
insanely anxious and nauseous.
Yeah.
Have you experienced anything like that throughout after all the three pregnancies?
Yes, there were still smells that would trigger nausea. But thankfully, because you don't have something physical in your body, I think it's more mental. So you don't have anything physical in your body that's making you throw up. The way I would deal with those sorts of things is just that I would just talk to myself and I'm like, okay, no, this is good. Or like I would sniff alcohol to kind of cut the smell that I was smelling.
Mm-hmm.
And then I wouldn't smell that particular odor anymore. Because for me, it was an odor, right? But it could be any smell that would trigger it. And it's the same smells that you would smell while pregnant. And out of nowhere, you're smelling them again, whether you're in the kitchen. And it's funny because it happened to me like 2 days ago. I opened my refrigerator and the smell, because I guess it's like the food smell, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of hit me and I just began to gag and I'm like, what is going on? And my baby is going to be 2 in March.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm like, what is wrong with me? So I kind of ignored it. Like I gagged, I ignored it. I just continued doing whatever I was doing. I opened the refrigerator again and I received the same response. And I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to have to do this later.
As of all the medical professionals that you've seen throughout this time,
Mm-hmm.
has anyone ever warned you that this is a thing that happens? Has anyone ever spoken to you about like, hey, even after you deliver, certain things
No,
could?
no. A lot of the things that I felt and had to deal with, honestly, it was just all through experience. Like no one sat down and said, oh, this is what's going to happen during these months and this is what's going to happen, like later on, or these are the effects of this and that. No one has ever sat down with me and spoken to me about any of this. I mean, I just experienced them and that's it. I just move on.
Have you have you done any particular things to maybe process the emotional trauma? Some women like journal, some people go to therapy because obviously this is insanely impactful to not
Yeah,
only your physical health but your mental health.
right.
Have you done anything to deal with it, or if anything at all?
During my pregnancies, I would journal. And for my first pregnancy, I still have those journals and I can't reread them because then it'll bring me back to how I was feeling during that time. Um, I remember like a few years back, I tried to read like a page or two and I just couldn't get through it. For both of my other pregnancies, I journaled, but I think it was more like on my phone. And I
Mm-hmm.
think after a while I just deleted them because I didn't want to go back to that. Like I didn't want to experience how I felt during that time. But I think I should have kept it just so that it's there for maybe my kids to see if they experience anything in the future. And then even after the pregnancies, I don't really do anything. I just try to move on from it. I think I'm just
Yeah.
really good about dealing with things, coming up with solutions, and just moving on.
So before you had your three pregnancies,
Hmm.
you've never heard of this condition
No,
before.
never,
Wow.
never.
And in reading about this, I also learned that it affects a pretty small portion of the population.
Yeah.
What is it? It's like 3% or
Yeah,
something.
it's a very small percentage of women that go through this. When I was pregnant, in order for me to cope with how I was feeling, even on the mental side, I would look up YouTube videos and just to see if there was anything out there. And there were a lot of women that created channels just for this particular reason, just to kind of tell other women what this was and how they dealt with it and what kind of medical responses they were receiving due to this. And I found it to be very similar to what was happening to me.
Mm-hmm.
So, you get a small window where you don't feel alone, but then for the rest of the day, you're basically experiencing this all on your own. At the same time, you're affecting everyone else around you. I think that's the most difficult part, is more of the mental side and how you feel while you're going through this.
Sure. Looking back, what resources do you wish were there? Like, what do you wish that was there that you could have leaned on, and something that you wish, could be created for women now that are going to be dealing with this, or maybe dealing with this, if you want to talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think there should be more support created around this condition. Maybe someone that comes to visit you so that they can talk to you, or a community center. I mean, you really can't go anywhere, right? But maybe like a center where you either physically go, or you can do it remotely, where you can just sit and talk to someone, maybe someone else who's going through it, or maybe
Hmm.
a professional who can strategize on what it is that you can do so that you don't feel so depressed.
Sure. And I'm sure it's like the unknown is what makes it so scary too, because not only you're dealing with all the stuff, it's like you don't know what's going on.
Right.
So
Yeah,
that,
and
yeah, that,
you feel like you're in a bubble that you can't break free from. That's how I felt. Like you're in this bubble, no one can help you. You're just there on your own and you have to figure it out. And you're looking forward, you're nervous about birth, but you're looking forward to it at the same time, not because you want to meet the baby, but because you want to feel like you again. And that's another thing, is that I feel like when you have this, I never connected with any of my bellies, any of the babies. I never, like, I never, of course you feel love, but because you're so sick all the time, I feel like you're clouded from that. So
right.
I didn't connect with any of my bellies.
Like you're associating your pregnancy, just due to the circumstances that you're dealing with, you're associating your pregnancy with like the pain and the suffering more so than the joy and the happiness
Exactly.
of the
Yes.
experience. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's really tough.
It's hurtful. And then my mom, she would say, "Oh, you're so cold hearted," and I'm like, "No, I just don't want this," And it's not that I didn't want the baby, I didn't
Uh-huh.
want my condition, And
Of course.
I think I say things sometimes so bluntly that it comes off as, "Oh, I don't want to be pregnant, I don't want this baby." But that
Mhm.
wasn't the case. I mean, like, I love babies. It's just that I didn't want to be going through this.
Yeah.
And it was just as simple as
Yeah.
that. I just didn't want to be sick.
Yeah. And that's very reasonable. Because being pregnant is hard enough.
Yeah, it
I
is.
mean, I only have one, so
But you
yeah,
know what it is.
and I feel like on the spectrum of challenging pregnancies, I definitely feel very lucky and fortunate because my pregnancy wasn't that challenging. It was pretty much, as straightforward as it could be. But even in that, there's a ton of its own challenges. Just, like the morning sicknesses, the yeah, whatever,
Right. Yeah.
all the things that
Mhm.
you go through, and just as you're growing, as you're getting bigger,
Yeah.
having to pee every five
Yeah.
seconds, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your
Of
story with me.
course.
I've never heard of this myself before, where you reached out to me and mentioned that this was a condition you suffered from, and naturally, I jumped on the opportunity to learn more about this because there's so many of these sort of hidden in plain sight
Yeah.
situations that women are experiencing in their pregnancies that are just sort of being pushed aside. And
Yeah.
this particular condition, there's definitely a dismissal of it in the medical community. It doesn't seem that nearly enough funds are being designated to the research, and that's how we end up in a situation where women like you are being told, stop exaggerating. You're making this up. And you're like, what do you mean? I'm
Right.
dying.
Yeah.
Why would I
Right.
make this up? I have
Mm-hmm.
no incentive to do so.
Right.
So thank you. Thank you for being brave, for sharing your story, for being brave and birthing 3 children
I know. I still
despite
can't
this.
believe it.
You're amazing. You're a hero. Um, I mean, I think this is a good way to kind of round it off. But before we finish, to any women, out there right now that might be listening to this, do you have any sort of message that maybe you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first, I would like to start by saying thank you for giving me the opportunity to come on here and talk about this, because this is very important. And although only a small percentage go through this, it should be recognized and it should be noticed, because even if you're not going through this yourself, you may know someone who's experiencing this, and therefore you can provide the proper support that this person needs. And it's not that someone is being dramatic, it's literally that they need your help and they don't know what to do or how to ask for it sometimes. And yeah, there is a message that I would like to say, and it's just, I feel you. I sympathize because I've gone through it, but I have gone through it and overcame. So be strong and hang in there and just try each and every day to just talk to yourself and pray. If you're a spiritual individual, telling yourself that you're going to get through this and it's going to be okay, and you are not alone. You're definitely not alone.
No, that's awesome advice. I'm sure it's going to be very valuable to a lot of
I
women.
hope.
Thank you again for your time. I
Of
know that
course.
you are a busy person with many things to do, but you know what? It's like you said, people need to know about this. People need to understand that this is a real thing.
Yeah,
And like you said, just because you're not going through it,
right.
that doesn't mean that you should turn a blind eye to other people around you who may be experiencing it. So essentially, pay attention.
For
All
sure.
right, be
For
open-minded
sure.
to this, and pay attention to your friends and your family members and people around you, and take note that just because something may not be so familiar to you, that doesn't mean it's not real.
Exactly.